Hello everyone, back to today's first video. We're doing the first Spring 2020 update for today's first video. So, yes, the long-range bandwagon is starting to roll again. We've taken the month off. We took December off when we got to the end of winter updates and released winter forecast. Had a little bit of a break. I had the flu as well, so it's just as well that we took December off. But now, here we go again. Things are starting to crank up once more. And the next season, of course, that we've got to think about is spring. So, yes, this is your first Spring 2020 update, and it will be pretty much a follow-on from the 13th and final Winter 2019-2020 update. So I'll talk about that in a moment. Just to say, it's going to be a busy old day at GWV today, so we're going to be bringing back GWV's Sunday Roundup just after lunch, around or just after lunch. So that's going to be your eclectic look at this and that on your Sunday afternoon for your Sunday afternoon viewing pleasure. And there'll be a Sunday Roundup every Sunday from now through to the end of August. So that is back, and it should hopefully be an interesting watch. I think we'll do Ensembles watch tonight as well, go through all 20 members of the GFS Ensembles, see what they're showing, see if there's any sign of cold weather in the next couple of weeks. So that will be coming up probably around 7, 8 o'clock this evening. I would have thought something like that. Just a bit of fun. Bit of a laugh, bit of a schedule filler, I suppose. So this is going to be quite a long video, of course, with all of the long-range stuff. They are relatively long videos. So if you can't watch it all in one go, then don't worry, it will be kept at GWV.com indefinitely, and on the YouTube channel as well, of course. I'm going to create, I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to create later on today a Spring 2020 updates page. This video will go on that page, and there'll be a written post that goes with it as well. So you can't watch all of the video in one go. You'll be able to have a read of that later on. Got to say a big thank you to Analogues guru James Ackrill for getting all of our analogues loaded up for us. Big thank you to James for doing that. Big thank you to Richard Trott for our wonderful GWV's 2020 Spring Updates gift. You're going to be seeing more of that through this update and, of course, through the coming weeks as well. I think that's pretty much everything that I've got to tell you. So I think it's time to get on with our first seasonal update for well over a month. So I think it's time to get on with it, and here we go. So what we're going to look at, as I say, it's like a direct follow on this. I wanted it to be a direct follow on from the 13th Winter update. Winter 2019-2020 update. So, you'll remember, if you saw the 13th Winter update, if you didn't, why not? If you saw that, you'll remember that we was looking at precipitation, so primarily autumn precipitation and also November precipitation and rainfall too. Now, we was doing it before the end of the autumn and the end of November, so we was kind of pitching where we thought things were likely to come out with autumn and with November. But wasn't terribly sure whether that is where things will come out. Well, of course, now we're well on into winter, so we've got the data for the autumn and November. The first thing that we looked at for autumn was the top 25 wettest autumns on record, and the winters that followed them. And thankfully, yes indeed, it did turn out that autumn 2019 was a top 25 wettest autumn. In fact, it was a top 5 wettest autumn. He's ranked for England and Wales as the 5th wettest autumn in the England and Wales precipitation series, going all the way back to the 1700s. This is from Hadley, showing how wet it was through the autumn of 2019 across many parts of England, particularly central east England. So we're going to look at springs following the top 25 wettest autumns. We've basically taken the same autumns that we looked at in the 13th winter update, but instead of looking at winters following those autumns, we're looking at springs following those autumns. So here we go. Top 25 wettest autumns. At number 25, we've got the autumn of 1998. This is how the spring of 1999 looks following that 25th wettest autumn. So we find that again an area of below average height centred over and to the west of the country. Bit of a northern blocking signal as well, but we also have high pressure sitting across southern parts of Europe. It's a funny old spring, relatively warm, and it's not a bad spring at all, although it does have a little bit of a cold snap in April of 1999. At number 24, in terms of the top 25 wettest autumns, we've got the autumn of 1967. Spring 1968 looks like this, rather a cool and unsettled spring. It's got above average heights over Greenland, with below average heights extending through the west of Europe. So it is a rather unsettled spring. I think May 1968 is a very thundery month as well. At number 23 for the top 25 wettest autumns, we've got the autumn of 1940. Spring 1941 looks like that. It's a very cold spring with high pressure centred over Greenland and Iceland, and low pressure over to the south and the east of the country. We're left bringing cold air like that through this spring. So quite a lot of wintry weather through the spring of 1941, I would have thought. Of course, this is part of the trilogy of very cold winters from 1939-40 to 1941-1942. There's 3 of them. This is right in the middle of that. So this pattern is probably indicative of the winter that had just gone, more than anything, the winter of 1940-1941, which was a very cold winter. Just to say, I've got a bit of a cough, a bit of tickle in the throat, so I may have to stop and have a bit of a cough and a drink of water for this video. Hope that you'll bear with me. The flu, it's more or less gone. I'm feeling a lot better, but the after effects just don't want to go with this one. It's the cough and the fatigue sort of lingering on. So just bear with me, but we will get through it together. Number 22 for the top 25 wettest autumns. We've got the autumn of 1883. Spring 1884 is looking like that, very unsettled. Below average heights tending to be to the west and southwest. It does have blocking up towards Greenland, but I would have thought that's quite a mild spring, actually. Probably bringing up the air from the south or southwest a lot of the time, but pretty wet. Number 21, we've got the autumn of 2012. Spring 2012-2013 is really cold, start off with anyway, with low pressure tracking to our south along with the jet stream going down through here, blocking up towards Greenland and Iceland. That's a very cold spring, especially early on in March and through to early April, bitterly cold, and we all remember the snowfalls and blizzards that occurred during March 2013. At number 20 for the wettest autumns, we've got the autumn of 1839. Spring 1840 has an area of above average heights just out to our west, below average heights to the east. And that means we're doing something a little bit like that with the flow and with the jet stream. Probably a relatively drier autumn. Spring, I should say, that one. Probably relatively drier and probably a bit on the cool side as winds will be coming in from the northwest. Excuse me. Our next autumn at number 19 for the top 25 wettest autumns is the autumn of 2002. Spring 2003 begins the pattern of that hot summer of 2003. So you have above average heights over to the east of the country, below average heights in the northern Atlantic. We draw up southerly winds a lot of the time through this spring. So we have conditions in March and April that are akin to sort of early summer rather than early spring, and things just get hotter and hotter from there. It's a warm and very warm spring in 2003. At number 18 for the top 25 wettest autumns, we've got 1836. The spring of 1837 is very unsettled. Looks like it will be a deluge type spring, and cold too, with high pressure to the north and a deep trough of low pressure covering much of northern and western Europe. Number 17 for the top 25 wettest autumns is 1835. The spring of 1836 looks unsettled and cool, with below average heights over and to the east of the country, above average heights up towards Greenland. That would be a cool and unsettled spring. Then we've got at number 16, the autumn of 1882. Spring 1883 has below average heights with low pressure to the south, above average heights out to the northwest. That looks like it would be quite a cool and maybe fairly unsettled spring as well. At number 15, we've got autumn 1984. Spring 1985 has below average heights over to the south of the country and a little bit of blocking left over from the winter. Of course, very cold winter, 84-85. That pattern does continue on and off anyway into the spring of 1985, so overall it is rather a cold and unsettled spring in 1985. At number 14 for our top 25 wettest autumns for England and Wales precipitation, we've got the autumn of 1885. Spring 1886 is unsettled with low pressure coming in from the Atlantic. There's a bit of blocking up towards Greenland, but I think this is a relatively mild spring as the winds are in from the west or from the southwest too. Just quite unsettled. At number 13, we've got the autumn of 1944. Spring at 1945 looks very nice, if you like dry and warm weather through the spring, because it has above average heights extending across much of Western and Central Europe, low pressure out there and over there. That looks like a pretty warm and dry pattern for the spring of 1945. At number 12, we've got autumn 1974, and the spring of 1975 is quite cold, actually. Let's change the colour. It's quite cold, with above average heights out to the northwest, and below average heights sort of to the south and southeast. And so a lot of the time through this spring, particularly through April of 1975, a lot of the time we're bringing in quite cold air from the north. It's a dry spring. It's a continuation of the dry pattern that we're in through the mid-70s, culminating in the Great Drought of 1976. So it is a dry spring, but it's quite a cold spring as well, particularly so in April. And then, of course, we have the famous snow event at the beginning of June 1975 as well. But the summer of 1975 turns on at 6 months, and it's actually a really hot summer. Anyway, that's quite a cold and dry spring in 1975. A little bit different from anything that we've seen so far. At number 11, we've got the autumn of 1954. Spring 1955 looks like that. Again, this is probably more than anything a continuation of the cold winter that we have in 54, 55. A lot of times when you have these cold winters, the pattern will persist to some degree anyway into the spring. You'll still be able to see the remnants of that cold winter through the spring season. So yes, we do have the high pressure towards Greenland and Iceland, trough of low pressure across the northern parts of Europe as well. It's sometimes quite a cool spring, very dry a lot of the time as well in the spring of 1955. Into the top 10 with the top 25 wettest autumns, we've got the autumn of 1880, spring 1881, looks like that. Again, probably more than anything a continuation of the cold winter pattern that occurred through the winter of 1880, 1881. This time we've got above average heights to our north towards Greenland and Iceland, below average heights across Scandinavia. So you can imagine it's quite a coldish spring. A lot of the time we're bringing in the wind from the north, but probably also the spring of 1881. Relatively dry. Number 9 for the top 25 wettest autumns is the autumn of 1841. Spring 1842 looks like that. So above average heights tending to be out to our west, below average heights some way to our east. I think a relatively dry spring here, and probably quite cool as well in the spring of 1842. Number 8 for the top 25 wettest autumns, we've got 1903. Spring 1904 looks unsettled, potentially very unsettled, with below average heights out to the west and westerly winds being fed in. So probably quite mild. I don't think it'd be particularly cold. There's no northern blocking to force cold air out of the Arctic. Certainly looks very unsettled though, so mild, perhaps quite warm, but also wet in the spring of 1904. Number 7, we've got 1872 with the top 25 wettest autumns, and the spring of 1873 has the below average heights again to the east, above average heights out to the northwest, probably again quite cool and unsettled in the spring of 1873. At number 6, we've got 1976. So 1976 is the 6th wettest autumn on record for England and Wales precipitation. The spring of 1977 looks like that. We have seen this sort of pattern quite a bit, actually, aren't we? So above average heights extending through the north and west of Europe, below average heights pulled out to the northwest. So again, probably quite a cool and unsettled spring there in 1977. You see that sort of pattern is recurring quite a bit within this package of analogues. And here we go again. This is going to be 1876, the spring of 1876. Does have sort of similarities. The only difference really is that the trough of low pressure is perhaps a bit deeper across the north and west of Europe, but still the same idea. Above average heights out to the northwest, trough of low pressure to the north, and then through the west of Europe. Jet stream doing like that. Again, probably quite a cool and unsettled spring. In the spring of 1876, following on from the 5th wettest autumn of 1875. Of course, now 2019, autumn 2019 displaces that. At number 4, we've got the autumn of 1935, and spring 1936 looks like this. So it does have quite strong blocking in the spring of 1936. High pressure centre from Scandinavia into the Atlantic. Low pressure down to the south. The jet stream's down there somewhere. I think this is probably quite a dry spring, actually, with the low pressure pushed a long way southwards. And I would have thought a lot of easterly winds. Of course, spring is a season that typifies easterlies. It's the season that is most likely to have easterly winds, and I suspect there is a lot of easterlies going on there through the spring of 1936. Remember, spring is a transitional season. So if you've got this pattern with high pressure just there around Iceland and low pressure down across Spain, you've got that pattern in March. That's going to be very cold. It will bring in very cold easterlies. If you've got that pattern in May, then that's going to be potentially quite warm, and for the south maybe a bit thundering. So it's that season, that sort of season where we're transitioning from one thing to another. Top 3 now. So the 3rd wettest autumn on record for England and Wales precipitation is the autumn of 1960. Spring 1961 looking very nice with above average heights. Again, centred across many western parts of Europe. That's a pretty dry and potentially very mild autumn as well. Spring, I should say, as well in 1961. Then we've got at number 2, the autumn of 1852. Spring 1853 has below average heights sort of to our southeast, above average heights to the northwest. That's potentially quite a cold spring, I think, in 1853. And then finally, at number 1, the wettest autumn on record for England and Wales precipitation is the autumn of 2000. Spring 2001 continues the unsettled weather to some degree, with low pressure still coming in off the Atlantic, high pressure up to the north, but quite strong ridging to the south as well. It's not a cold spring. In fact, it's quite a mild spring, although there is cold weather in March and through to April, but then I think it gets a lot milder late in April and through to May of 2001. But overall, this is an unsettled spring, and low pressure is still in control of the pattern, as it has been really since the year before. Excuse me. So putting all of that together, I'm not sure if my voice is going to hold out for this video, I have to say, but we'll see how we go. Putting all of that together, this is how all Marches combined are looking following the top 20 wettest autumns for England and Wales precipitation, and it's quite an unsettled and cold signal for March, with above average heights tending to be focused up to, by the way, we look at the top 20 rather than top 25 when we do the all months combined, the all seasons combined, because you can only have 20 separate years within the package. So we've gone from looking at the top 25 to now putting the top 20 together. Hope that makes sense. So yes, we've got blocking up towards green and ice, and low pressure is to the south, so this could be quite a cold and wintry scene signal for March. Then we go through to all Aprils combined, following the top 20 wettest autumns for England, Wales precipitation. Low pressure tends to be to the north and west. High pressure tends to be pushed out to the west of us. It's not as cold a signal, not as clear-cut cold signal for April. Nevertheless, these Aprils could be a little bit on the cool side on average. And then all Mays combined look like that, following the top 20 wettest autumns. Again, we have the below average heights extending through the north and west of Europe. The above average heights pulled just out to our west. That's probably a drier signal for the all Mays combined. But still, I would have thought relatively cool. So perhaps favouring a relatively coolish sort of spring here, following these wet autumns. And then, of course, we have to look at all springs combined. So this is how all spring months and all springs combined are coming out, following the top 20 wettest autumns. England and Wales, above average heights out to the northwest, below average heights extending through the north, west and central parts of Europe. So the most clear-cut cold month is March. Then the signal fades a little bit, but relatively cool with these springs. And probably quite unsettled as well. It's not a particularly inspiring anomaly. Narrowing it down a bit more to the top 10 wettest autumns. This is how all Marches are coming out. Again, it does have a northern blocking signal for the Marches, with high pressure tending to be up towards Greenland, low pressure tending to be to the south of us. And we could pull in some quite cold winds from the north at times with these Marches. All Aprils combined, similar to the top 20 combined, but the high pressure, I think, is pushed a little bit further away from us. The trough of low pressure is deep over Scandinavia, so if anything, that's a rather colder, with the top 10 wettest autumns, it's a rather colder and more unsettled signal for the Aprils, to be honest. This isn't particularly inspiring, I have to say, for spring. And then all Mays combined tends to have the high pressure closer to us compared to the top 20. So for the top 10 wettest autumns, all Mays combined tends to have quite an anticyclonic signal. The trough of low pressure is quite some way from us here, so this is a much drier signal for the Mays. Much more pleasant, but maybe still a little bit on the cool side, if anything. But that does look a lot more pleasant, I think, with that area of above average heights much closer to us, with the all Mays combined. And then finally, for this first part of the video, this is how all springs combined are looking, following the top 10 wettest autumns for England and Wales precipitation. Very similar to the top 20, above average heights out to the northwest around Greenland, Iceland, below average heights extending through the north and west of Europe. Again, doing something like that with a flare with the jet stream, quite cool and unsettled. Remember, March has the most clear-cut cold signal with the strongest blocking towards Greenland. By the time we get to May, we could be much more anticyclonic, much more pleasant, but maybe not overly mild even then. Right, so there we go. That's the first part of the first Spring 2020 update. Voice is holding out. Hopefully it will continue to do so. I'm going to pause the video there. Going to go and get myself a drink of water, and then we'll look at a little bit of November data for spring as well. So I'll see you in around 2 seconds' time. Okay, we're back, and we're ready to resume the first Spring 2020 update. So we've been talking in the first part of the video about autumn precipitation data. That follows on from the 13th and final winter update, when we looked at the top 25 top 20 wettest autumns and the winters that follow them. This time we've looked at the top 25 wettest winters and the springs that follow them. What we also looked at in that final winter update was November precipitation data. Now, we pitched that one a little bit wrong. I think we looked for that one again at the top 20 or so wettest Novembers. Actually, this November did fall outside the top 20 wettest Novembers. So for that one, we did pitch it a little bit wrong. But it wasn't all that far out. It was quite a wet month. And we can see here with the data from Hadley again, the November rainfall, but it was pretty wet for particularly the Midlands, central England, up in towards northeastern parts of England as well, Lincolnshire, Yorkshire, up the eastern side of the UK, and then down towards parts of the Midlands, and some southern parts of England also had quite a wet month. Actually, the total November England and Wales precipitation came out at 138 millimetres, so it was a pretty wet month. Any month that comes out over 100 millimetres, I think, is quite a wet month. So yes, it was a wet month, but I think it fell just outside the top 20 wettest. So what we're going to look at for this second part of the video is springs following Novembers, with an England and Wales precipitation range of 125 to 150 millimetres. That, of course, places November 2019 slap bang in the middle of that range, as it has a November England and Wales P of 138 millimetres. So, the first spring we're going to look at following this November England and Wales range of 125 to 150 millimetres is the spring of 1839, and this one has below average heights to our east, above average heights, and quite a strong area of above average heights as well, sitting in the Norwegian Sea. That looks like it's a cold spring in 1839. I'll just get rid of that. And we're going to get rid of that as well. And let's get rid of that too. Our next spring is 1840, following November England Wales precipitation of 125 to 150 millimetres. The spring of 1840 has above average heights out to our west, below average heights to the east. Quite a dry spring signal that, I would have thought again. And there will be overlap, by the way, with some of these compared to the first batch of analogues that we just looked at for the wet autumns, of course. This is one of those that overlaps. It's a drier signal and probably quite a cooler signal as well. Spring 1841, again following this November England and Wales precipitation range of 125 to 150 millimetres, looks quite unsettled with low pressure over top of the UK and some high pressure up to the north. Don't think it would be particularly cold, that, but it would be unsettled, and we're bringing in a westerly flow. Next spring is 1862, looking very unsettled and quite mild. We're bringing in westerly, southwesterly winds, but with such a deep area of low pressure over the top of the country and to our west, that would be a mild and unsettled spring. 1873 is our next spring, with above average heights to the northwest, below average heights to the east and southeast. So probably quite cool and probably quite unsettled with this spring. The spring of 1876 shows up next. Again, above average heights towards Greenland, below average heights through the north and west of Europe. Again, quite a cool and unsettled spring, but potentially a little bit more unsettled compared to that last one. Spring 1878 follows, again, November England and Wales precipitation of 125 to 150 millimetres. This is quite an unsettled spring, with below average heights coming in off the Atlantic, so it looks like it's a wet spring, probably relatively mild. It does have a ridge down towards the Azores, some northern blocking, but more towards the Canadian side of Greenland. So I reckon that would be a relatively mild spring, perhaps in 1878. But definitely quite unsettled. 1883, this one showed up in the first part of the video, of course, with above average heights out to the northwest, below average heights to our south-southeast. That looks like it's quite a cool and unsettled spring. 1889 is the next spring, following England and Wales P of 125 to 150 millimetres. This one with high pressure again towards the Norwegian Sea, low pressure tending to be to the south. So probably bringing in a lot of easterly winds with that to work. It could be quite a cold start to the spring, getting warmer perhaps a little bit later on. The spring of 1911 shows up next. This precedes the hot summer, of course, of 1911. This one has high pressure sitting over to the north of the country, below average heights to the south. Potentially that's starting to get the pattern going for the summer, perhaps, with which is a high pressure dominated summer. So I reckon probably relatively dry, maybe quite cool to begin, and then getting warmer as the spring progresses. The next spring is 1931. This one has below average heights to our south. High pressure is up to the north. So I think this one is probably bringing in a lot of easterly winds through 1931. And it's probably quite unsettled too. Spring 1932 looks cold and unsettled. Deep trough of low pressure in the northwest of Europe, but a much stronger ridge of high pressure towards Greenland that will potentially force out cold air from the north. So that's a cold and unsettled spring, I think, in 1932. 1961 is our next spring, following an England and Wales precipitation range of 125 to 150 millimetres. This one showed up in the last package of analogues, of course. This one with high pressure sitting over west of Europe looks like a relatively warm and dry spring in 1961. Spring 1970 turns up next with below average heights to the east and above average heights out to the west. That's cold, especially to start off with. Cold March in 1970 and very snowy as well. Real snowstorms in the opening days of March 1970. Think it gets warmer through that spring later on. This one also showed up in our first part of the video. This is again the spring of 1975. It's a cold and dry spring, this one, with high pressure out to the west and low pressure to the south and southeast. We bring in the wind from the north a lot of the time, and especially in April. It is a cold and quite wintry April 1975, and then it gets much warmer as we go into the summer. The spring of 1983 is also quite cold and unsettled. Below average heights tend to be over the UK and west of Europe. High pressure pulled out well into the middle of the Atlantic. Not as much northern blocking as some of the years that we've seen here, but it is quite a cold and unsettled spring. There's a memorable white Easter, I think, in 1983. 1993 is a different one. So this is the spring of 1993, again following that England and Wales precipitation range of 125 to 150 millimetres. This one has high pressure more over Scandinavia, low pressure out to west. So this is quite a warm and a relatively dry spring, actually, in 1993. There's a lot of warm and dry weather through the first half of 1993. We get to July, and like that, it flips into something much colder through the second half of the year. That's an interesting spring to see within our package of analogues. The spring of 1997 turns up next. This is a warm and dry spring, or warm and dry start and middle part of the spring anyway. So March and April of 1997 are dominated by high pressure, bringing lots of dry, fine and increasingly warm weather that lasts into the May Day bank holiday weekend, and then famously it flips over that May Day bank holiday weekend. It goes from really unusually hot weather at the start of it to snowing by May Day bank holiday Monday, and the rest of May 1997 is actually cool and wet. Then we've got the spring of 2013 turning up again. So this one is a cold spring, of course, with below average heights to the south. High pressure is blocking to the north. That's a cold spring, particularly cold from March through to April. It contains the coldest March, I think, either since 1962 or potentially since 1883, depending on which data series you take. And then finally, we have got 2015. This is the spring of 2015. This one has above average heights down to our southwest, below average heights up to the northwest. This is quite a dry and relatively warm, or certainly very mild spring in 2015. Putting all of that together, this is how all Marches combined are looking following a November England and Wales precipitation range of 125 to 150 millimetres. For March, we have strong blocking in the North Atlantic and going up towards Greenland, with below average heights tending to be to our east and south. You could envisage these Marches, on average, are really quite cold and wintry. All Aprils combined look like this, so they tend to have below average heights to the east of us. So just quite an unsettled and cool signal for the Aprils, but we don't have the northern blocking. It's the northern blocking that forces the very cold air out of the pole, because the further on we go, the harder it is to achieve, into spring, harder it is to achieve very cold conditions. So I reckon that's just pretty cool and quite unsettled, really, on average. And then May looks quite grim, with below average heights centred more or less over the UK and much of Central and Western Europe. High pressure coming back a little bit to the north, if anything. So they could be quite wet and pretty cool Mays. And then finally, the South Springs combined are looking, again, with the above average heights tending to be towards Greenland and Iceland, but below average heights to our south and southeast. So at the very least, an unsettled and a cool signal for these springs. And some of them could bring some notably cold weather indeed. Not particularly inspiring, I have to say, for update number 1, but maybe from here it's only going to get better. Of course, some of you might be hoping we have a cold spring. We certainly haven't quite a mild winter so far, so maybe you're hoping that spring will unleash some wintry weather. Few people might be. I'd rather get on with warmer, drier conditions, I have to say, as we get into spring. But weather will do what it wants. Whatever we wish and hope for, I mean, the weather will not obey our command. The weather gods will do what they like, and we just have to observe and put up with it. So if we are to have a cold and wet spring following on from a mild winter, it certainly wouldn't be the first time it's happened. It wouldn't be the last time it happens either. But we've got many more updates to go, of course. There's going to be an update most weeks, I would have thought, from now to the end of February, when we will release, obviously, the GWV Spring 2019 forecast. Anyway, update number 1 is done and dusted for spring 2020. I think I just said spring 2019. I still haven't got my head around 2020 yet. So you'll probably hear me say randomly 2019 at different points throughout the videos for the next few weeks. And it'll be a little while before I've got the old grey matter in 2020 mode. But I will get there. So if I ever say 2019, you'll know that really I'm talking about 2020. So the first update for spring 2020 is done and dusted. I have another update for you next week. I think we're looking at December data perhaps next week, but more about that when we get to it. This video is going to be placed on the spring updates and forecast page. It hasn't been created as I'm recording the video on Saturday night, but I am going to get it created on Sunday. So it'll be placed on that page. There'll be a written summary going over everything that we discussed in the video. And I'll get that up for you sometime late this afternoon or into this evening. We've got GWV Sunday Roundup coming up over or just after lunch. And also, I think we're going to have Ensembles Watch for you this evening as well. So quite a busy day. Hope you're enjoying all of the updates of the content that we're beginning to crank back up again now. Having a quieter December to wind down from the winter updates, as I say. And also courtesy of the flu. That sort of set me back quite a bit. So we begin to get things cranking up again now. And more updates coming up through the rest of the day. Alright, at 37 minutes, nowhere near as long as a winter update, so I'm sure you're all relieved about that. Nowhere near as long with this as the winter updates. But at 37, nearly 38 minutes, that's all for now. And thanks for watching.